You do not hate small talk because you are antisocial. You hate it because you can feel the difference between a real conversation and a performance. And most people cannot tell the difference at all. That is not arrogance. That is not impatience. That is your mind working at a level most people around you simply never reach. And the frustration you feel in shallow conversations is not a personality flaw. It is the entirely predictable result of a perceptual gap that has followed you your whole life without anyone ever explaining it clearly. Think about the last time someone asked you how you are doing and genuinely expected a one-word answer. You gave them the one word, but something in you quietly closed. Not because you disliked them, because the question was never really asking anything. It was just filling air. And you felt that emptiness the moment the words left their mouth, before you even responded, in a way they never felt at all. That gap between what you sense and what others notice is what this video is about. Most people explain your experience as introversion. Some call it social anxiety. Others assume you are simply shy or difficult to reach. But here is what nobody has told you yet. What you experience in social situations is not a temperament issue. It is a perceptual one. Your mind is processing conversations at a depth that makes surface-level exchange feel not just boring but genuinely uncomfortable. Like being handed a children's book when what you actually need is something real. And there is one specific thing your mind does automatically in every conversation that explains not just why small talk feels hollow, but why you sometimes walk away from perfectly pleasant interactions feeling strangely alone. We will get to that precisely. And when we do, something that has quietly confused you for years will finally make complete sense. First, here is what is actually happening when you sit across from someone making small talk and feel that quiet internal resistance rising. Your mind is not just hearing their words. It is reading the entire signal simultaneously. The gap between what they are saying and what their face is communicating. The emotional texture underneath the cheerful surface. The specific quality of their attention, whether they are genuinely present or simply going through a social ritual they have performed 1,000 times before. You process all of that automatically, instantly, without trying. And here is the strange part. Most people are not doing this. They hear the words at face value, respond at face value, and move on feeling perfectly satisfied. The conversation did exactly what it was supposed to do for them. Maintain social warmth at minimal emotional cost. But for you, the same conversation triggered a multi-layered reading that returned data you had no use for and nowhere to put. You know more about the emotional state of the person you just chatted with than they intended to reveal. And yet, the conversation gave you nothing real in return. That imbalance, giving your full perception to an exchange that offers nothing back at the same depth, is what exhausts you. Not the people. Not even the small talk itself. The mismatch between what you bring to every conversation and what most conversations are actually built to hold. Have you ever been in a group conversation, said something you genuinely meant, and watched it land in complete silence, only for someone else to say almost the same thing 5 minutes later and get a warm response from everyone in the room? You probably smiled and said nothing, but something in you noticed, and filed it away, and quietly wondered whether the problem was what you said or simply how you exist in social spaces. It was neither. Here is what was actually happening. Your contributions to conversations tend to cut deeper than the moment is prepared for. Not because you misjudged the room, because you are operating at a different frequency than the conversation is currently running on. Small talk has an unspoken social contract. It asks everyone to stay at the surface, to keep things light, mutual, and emotionally low stakes. When you speak from a place of genuine depth inside a conversation that is running on surface energy, the room does not know how to receive it, so it passes over it. Not because your observation was wrong, because it landed in the wrong container. This has probably happened to you more times than you can count. And over the years it has taught you something, not consciously, but through accumulation. It taught you that certain rooms are not worth the full version of you. So you learn to edit, to give people the version of yourself that fits the container they have available. To show up partially rather than risk showing up completely and being met with that silence again. That editing is exhausting in a way that is almost impossible to explain to someone who has never had to do it. Because it is not just about choosing your words carefully. It is about continuously monitoring the gap between who you actually are and who you are being in this moment. and managing that gap in real time without letting anyone see the management happening. Here is what most people completely miss about why you prefer silence over small talk. It is not that you have nothing to say. You have more to say than most conversations could hold. It is that the performance required to participate in surface-level exchange, the editing, the monitoring, the shrinking costs you something real, and silence costs you nothing. In silence, you do not have to manage the gap. You can simply exist at your actual depth without apologizing for it. But here is where it gets really interesting, because this preference for silence is not just about avoiding discomfort. It is about something your mind actively needs that small talk structurally cannot provide. Every time you have a conversation that goes somewhere real, where the other person meets you at depth, where the exchange builds on itself, where you leave knowing something true about another human being and feeling genuinely known in return, you do not feel drained afterward. You feel restored, sometimes more energized than before the conversation started. That is not introversion. Introverts are drained by all social interaction regardless of quality. What you experience is something more specific. You are not drained by people. You are drained by shallowness. And that distinction changes everything about how you understand yourself. Which leads directly to the thing I mentioned at the very beginning. The specific thing your mind does automatically in every conversation that explains why shallow exchange leaves you feeling strangely alone even when nothing bad happened. Here it is. And it is simpler than you might expect. Every time you enter a conversation, your mind is unconsciously searching for a moment of genuine recognition. Not agreement, not entertainment, not even connection in the broad social sense. Something more specific than all of those. A moment where another person says or reveals something that confirms they are experiencing the same interior world you are. That underneath their words there is the same complexity, the same awareness, the same quiet sense of how much is always going unsaid. You are not looking for someone to impress you. You are looking for evidence that you are not alone in experiencing the world at this depth. Small talk cannot provide that evidence. By design, it stays at the surface where everyone looks roughly the same. And so every small talk interaction ends with your mind returning from its search empty-handed. The conversation happened. It was perfectly pleasant. And yet you feel lonelier than you did before it started. Not because the person failed you, because the format did. Here is the part most people in your position have never fully examined. That loneliness is not evidence that genuine connection is unavailable to you. It is evidence that you have an unusually precise idea of what genuine connection actually feels like, because you have felt it before, even if rarely. You know the difference between a conversation that fed you and one that left you hollow because you have experienced both. Most people have never felt that contrast clearly enough to name it. You have. And knowing what real connection feels like is not a curse. It is the thing that will eventually lead you directly to it. But there is something honest worth sitting with before we finish. Because this video would be incomplete if it only validated your experience without acknowledging what it costs. Seeing the world differently than most is genuinely isolating sometimes. Not romantically isolating, actually quietly, persistently isolating in a way that accumulates over years. The editing, the managing, the showing up partially, the conversations that end with you knowing more about the other person than they will ever know about you. The friendships that stay permanently in the shallows because the other person never noticed there was anything deeper available. That is real. And it deserves to be named honestly rather than reframed into something that only sounds like an advantage. You are not broken for finding small talk hollow. You are not antisocial for preferring one real conversation over 20 pleasant ones. You are not difficult for needing depth the way other people need air. You simply experience the world at a resolution that most people around you never access. And that means most social environments were not designed with you in mind. Not because you are too much, because they were built for a different kind of person entirely. The conversations you are looking for exist. The people capable of having them exist. They are quieter than most, harder to find, and worth every hollow exchange you sat through on the way to finding them. Because when you finally find someone who speaks at your depth, you will not need to edit a single word. And you will know it in the first 5 minutes.